Okay, yes, I'm a Goldsmith, as you might or might not know, and we have a history politics degree. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good degree. I like that degree. So I'm trained as an historian, and I fell into this political science about 20 years ago. So I think when I was an undergraduate, I went to one or two political, as they're called in America, political science. I'm from the United States, originally, political science courses, but more my degrees are in history, and I'm in the I at one point was the head of a politics department, so history and politics really close. This I just got from wiki quotes instead of WikiLeaks, but I mean it seems to have actually a good compilation. That one seems to be fatter than these ones, and that's because it's the long one. You don't need that. These have they just have all the different definitions of anarchism, basically. So they're much more useful. Yeah. I think, I mean, you know, with WikiLeaks, as you probably know, this is sometimes dodgy, but these seem to be okay. They've just taken, you know, kind of aggregated all these different definitions from, you know, different places. And I think, where's my other thing? Hold on for a second. I must have it somewhere else. I hope so. Anyway, bear with me. Yeah, it must be one of these. There. Yeah, here. Yeah. By the way, I mean, I'll give you this just to give you a sense. Don't be. I'll give you the off-put by this, but this is the reading list for my course in anarchism, which I'm running right now. Well, actually, you can have it. Fine. It's an essay-based course, so it's a 0.5. It goes from January until, well, Easter now, you know, end of March. That means you just have to do a 5,000-word essay. So that what I've done here is they don't read all these books, but I've given them lots of books they could use for whatever specialized topic they want. And I only have 10 sessions. You know, university goes really for 20 sessions, believe it or not. You know, we have 10 lectures and.
So this is what sort of fraction of?
This is a 0.5, one half a unit in the last year, third-year students, right? So they're about to graduate, and
so half a unit out of how many units in total?
Oh God, yeah, that's a good question. How many do you do? 4 units a year, so yeah, you do 12 units.
So this is 1/8 of 1 year.
Well, one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Or one. Yeah, 1/8. Yeah, okay.
1/8 of 1
year. You do four courses a year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And is it a degree course where the first year doesn't count towards the final degree?
Well, it counts a bit. No, it doesn't work like that. I think at one point it was like a state secret talking about states, and anarchists are interested in states, as you know. But they changed that, so everyone knows what it's, how you calculate the degree. So it's like 10% for the first year. It's worth something. And then it goes up to maybe something like 30 or 40%, but the last year is where you really accelerate 50 or 60% of the final result. So I have about 35, 40 students in this, which is quite a bit for an option, I must say, but it seems to be popular. And by the way, before I start talking about this, I don't know, what have you read? Have you read any books, things about anarchism, or you've just read snippets here and there?
Our teacher gave us.
Oh, Rudolf Rock, he's fun, yeah.
You guys have just started studying it in class, haven't you? But not got that far.
Right.
Whereas Louis hasn't. Have you done, where you say, I don't know, have you done anything on anarchism before?
Not particularly. I've been delving into some parts, but I've made...
You've done isms, though.
Yeah,
ideology.
There's 2 politics students and a philosophy student. So
right.
The courses are slightly different. We're doing political philosophy.
All right. So you have political philosophy here?
We're doing a bit of we're doing political philosophy, which is half the philosophy course.
Right.
But we've only just started, and we've only looked at conservatism, socialism, liberalism.
Right. Oh, there's an interesting debate, in anarchism, which, and even not on the left, but on the right too, Nozick and people like this who are, well, and there's Wolf's famous study of anarchism many years ago now. Anyway, so you haven't. I mean, you've read Rudolf Rocker's memoirs, then?
Not the whole thing, just
A little bit.
it's probably like 2 pages.
2 pages, yeah. He's quite charming. He lived in the East End. You know, he was exiled here from about 1890-ish to 19. He was imprisoned. You know that he was banged up in Alexandra Palace. You know, we talk about Guantanamo Bay these days. Well, they had, during the First World War, if you were an enemy alien, which he was a German, right? Although, of course, if he had gone back to Germany, he would have been arrested because he was an anarchist. Nevertheless, they still banged him up, and they put him up in Alexandra Palace with all the other enemy aliens. Some of them didn't particularly like him, so they're all stuffed together there. You know, where you now have the ice skating, the rink, I suppose, or whatever. And he actually wrote a famous study of this, protesting, called something like Behind the Barbed Wire, so to get them a better deal, which I think they did eventually. So he was actually interned for 4 or 5 years, right, top of the hill here in Muswell Hill. It was a prisoner of war camp. You know, it wasn't, they weren't soldiers, they were just civilians. Kind of has, you know, vibrations in the last 10 years in at least the United States. Right, so let me hand out these things. Give you oh, I don't have enough of this one. We'll have to look at this. That's the one I couldn't photocopy. But you can have these. This is from, this is a handout for you. And also, now, do I have enough? I have enough of these. This is, they actually bumped me off the internet, but Encarta, you know, the Microsoft Encarta Encyclopedia, this used to run, and I think they've actually discontinued, for at least for the last 7 years. I wrote it back in 2003. And this is it without the nice little picture. I mean, if it was on the internet, it has these wonderful pictures of all the famous anarchists, Proudhon, Bakunin, and so on. But this is 7 pages on anarchism. So if you want, in a nutshell, you can have that. Yeah, so that you can have there. And if you're interested in reading, you know, a few books about anarchism, which there's one book that's very short. It's on that reading list I've given you. If you go to like pages, let me just show you. So might as well. Again, as I said, don't be off-put by this thing because it's really a kind of resource. It isn't something you're not supposed to. It's not telling you to read all these things. But first of all, there are lots of websites. You can look at that yourself on page 5, and a lot of the stuff is free, as it should be if you're an anarchist. You can download it, all the texts, you know, the famous classical texts. By the way, I would suggest when you're studying ideologies, not just to read the accounts and the account of the accounts, actually read the people, you know. And sometimes even my students, they read the account of the account of the account. It's much better to, you know, read William Godwin or something like that, or at least a little bit of him, and then if you find it a bit difficult, then read an account. But that's the way you get a sense of what these people are. Thinkers are. If you're interested in any kind of general surveys on anarchism, on pages page 2 and 3, there's a book by Ruth Kinna called A Beginner's Guide, Anarchism. So that's a good book. She's very good. She teaches at Loughborough. Interesting place to go if you want to see.
Is that one of the series? There's a series.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Oxford One World, and that's number 9 on page 2. That's easy to read, I think. Peter Marshall's a big book. You could murder somebody with it, drop it off a cliff or something. But you don't have to read the whole thing. You can read, I'm interested in Bakunin, so you read the chapter on Bakunin. My problem with him, although he's a friend, in Death Number 11, is that sometimes I think he thinks everyone's an anarchist, so it gets a bit too watered down. He's got this thing called anarchist, and then he calls libertarian tradition, and it's maybe not focused enough, but he's got everything, so you can just pick and choose what you want to read about. Those are 2 books. And then a book that's much shorter, and you must know this series, on number 17 on page 3, that's the Oxford University Press, very short introduction. And Colin Ward has written some. Colin Ward was a famous British anarchist who died last year, who was a kind of, you might say, like a reformist anarchist. What he did was he was involved in things like talking about squatting and housing and libertarian solution to housing, or schooling, or mental hospitals, or children. you know, Adventure Playgrounds, you know Adventure Playgrounds? They were created by people like him back in the 1960s as an idea of free-form play. He wrote a lot about children in the city, I mean around Hackney, actually. So he was a lovely man, but he's no longer with us. You can actually, if you Google his name, you probably get some of the interviews with him. They're on YouTube, which are very nice. Very kind of English-type anarchist, I would say. David Miller, number 12 up there, which is, you know, getting on in time. If you're interested in philosophy, then you'd read him as a philosophical account of anarchism. So that's, you know, that's more than enough to get on with. And then there are loads of different anthologies. The most recent one is Robert Graham's anthology, which is now into its 3rd volume, which goes from the ancient world to 2007. There are 3 volumes of it, but that's expensive, even in paperback, I think. But you can find it in the library. That's number 1 over there on page 3. So that's the reading, more than enough reading, but you can keep that and think about it at some other time. Right, so anarchism. Well, I mean, you can see what I've put down here. First we have that, and we have these dictionary definitions of what this anarchism is. And I think the first thing I would say before I describe it is when is it, you know, and where is it? Because this is the problem with Peter Marshall. He, this handout, this thing I gave him being a sponsor, and then this, you know, the WikiLeaks, whatever it is, the wiki quotes. Those 2 things I think are useful to look at the time being. The problem is when does it happen? I mean, what you see in Peter Marshall's book, and you might see it if you read George Woodcock's book or James Joel's book, all these famous overviews of anarchism, is that they sort of say, oh, there was anarchism all the time. There were anarchists in ancient Greece, you know, and you can trace the word back to ancient Greece, Greek, that's true. There are anarchists in ancient China. There's somebody who's written a book, Patricia Crone, who is I talk about it in my reading list I've given you. Patricia Crone, who is an expert on early Islamic societies, 8th, 7th, and 8th century Islamic societies. She wrote a famous article in Past and Present, which is a famous historical journal, which was called 8th Century Anarchists in Basra, right? Now, with all of these things, that in ancient world, medieval world, or even Civil War England in the 17th century, my argument is that none of these people are anarchists, and this is very maybe kind of silly and pedantic, you know, trying to be really like being a scholar and being overdoing it, is that since they don't call themselves anarchists, they can't be anarchists. The word anarchist in the sense of anarchism, ideology, learning about ideology, they don't think of the world that way, you know. Most of these people are deeply religious, not all of them, because some of the Greek cosmopolitans were pretty wild and wonderful for their time. They probably weren't religious. But most of the other ones think in a religious idiom and don't really have a state. In order to be an anarchist, you have to be opposed to a state. Where do they live? They live in city-states. They live in things that aren't the modern state, in any case. And they also don't live in the era of the Enlightenment, you know, the 18th century, 17th century scientific revolution and the rise of rationalism in the 18th century. So you can find people who theorize about a society without coercion, based on consensus, living together without forcing things upon other people, right? You can find this in religious texts. I mean, for instance, in Christianity, in some ways, the Sermon on the Mount, socialists and anarchists have used that as a radical text. Well, Jesus Christ wasn't an anarchist in the way that we understand anarchism today. You can also find people who live this way in so-called primitive parts of the world. Lots of anthropologists would say, oh, I remember talking about many years ago, actually people have been undiscovered until then, or probably not, but they have this thing of trying to undiscovered people, up one of the tributaries of the Amazon River, which actually was in Venezuela, because Amazon was very, very long. And she said to me, Carl, I think these people are anarchists. You know, they have this kind of, they don't have really a leadership. They have this, they can do everything by consensus. I said, no, yes, they are. I said, they are not. They live their lives